Okay, so the topic of today is Zmanim in Halacha, and at the top of the handout you have here something which I think is a very important fact to note, which is if you look at this table of times from Newcastle Gateshead, you will see that some times of year, beginning in May and going I think till August. On the other side, you only have half the year here. Mm-hmm. There is no Rabbeinu Tam Sheki'ah. In other words, you don't get to the darkness, which Rabbeinu Tam has told us is supposed to be the darkness required in order to get. Sheki'ah, Tzeis. You don't get to Rabbeinu Tam Tzeis. You never get that level of darkness. Now, what? I'm going to. They're going to explain. So that's that. So this is true about most of the places in Europe where Jews lived. We, the latitude we're on, is more or less opposite Madrid in Spain. So all the places where Jews lived were much further north, at least after 1492. So they lived in places like Frankfurt, Berlin, and even further north in Vilna and in the Riga, and what do you name those places? They're all quite far north. And they all face the same issue as Gateshead does, which is it doesn't get completely dark in the summer, right? It doesn't get completely dark. The sun doesn't go enough beneath the horizon to be completely dark, which raises a major problem, of course. If it's not completely dark, how do we determine what's considered to be dark for halachic purposes in these countries? And this is an issue which we'll come back to after we discuss the foundations, but that's important to bear in mind. There was a big problem which they faced, which it doesn't get completely dark. Now, I'm not talking about places like the farthest north Jewish community is in Trondheim, Sweden. And in Trondheim, the sun doesn't set in the summer. But I'm talking about even places where the sun does set, it doesn't get completely dark. Okay?
It's daytime the whole day and night is daytime.
In Trondheim, Sweden, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Because the summer is the opposite.
Yeah.
In the summer it doesn't actually fully set, it just lowers it, raises it.
Wow.
It's about 3 months of complete daylight.
Yeah. And it's winter, 3 months of complete darkness when the sun doesn't rise.
Oh, we want to be there.
Yeah. So,
Why do you think the Vikings won't travel? They're tired of it.
So in order to understand the issues here, we have two conflicting Gemaras, which are the basis of all Zmanim and all the issues of Zmanim. And the first was in Shabbos, Daf Lamed Aleph and Beis, next page. Turn Rabbanan, by the Aleph. Bein HaShmashos, Safek Min HaLayla. Bein HaShmashos, twilight. We don't know if it's daytime or nighttime. Safek Kula Min HaYom, Safek Kula Min HaLayla. So it could be that any time in the middle, it switches from day to night. It could be that all of it is from day, or all of it is from night. We don't know the status of Bein HaShmashos. So the Achronim, specifically the Rogachover, and I don't think Rabbi Yoshe Soloveitchik was the other one, perhaps even goes back further, but they hold that Bein HaShmashos is a Cheftza Shel Safek, right? In other words, it's not a suffix whichever could be clarified. It's intrinsically a suffix. Its status is a status of twilight, not day and not night, right? It's not just we don't know. And that's for the Gemara. It's a little bit. It doesn't seem that way, but that's the way I understand it. Bein HaShmashos is intrinsically a time which has elements of day, elements of night fused together. And that has actually obviously halachic ramifications. So, but the Gemara here just says it's a suffix. We don't know exactly what it is. So, Matina Sol Chomesh Neyamim. You have to give it the stringencies of both days. In other words, the day before and the day after. Bein HaShmashos. What is Bein HaShmashos? Mishetishka Chama, once the sun sets, Kol Zman Shebnei Mizrach Ma'adimim. As long as the eastern sky is red. Hichsiv HaTachton. If the bottom of the sky has become dark, but not the upper part of the sky, Bein HaShmashos. That's considered to be Bein HaShmashos, twilight. If in the upper part of the sky it's dark, and lower part of the sky, it's and the same darkness as the lower part of the sky. Zeu laila. David Rabbi Yehuda.
One second, I'm sorry, Rabbi. What does it mean, the upper part of this?
I was about to say, what does that mean, the upper part of the sky, lower part of the sky? You took the words out of my mouth.
Sorry.
So no problem. So so that's the question. In other words, are we talking about in the eastern half of the sky, or are we talking about the totality of the sky? Right? In other words, the sun is setting in the west. Right? So now, obviously, the further down in the horizon on the east, the darker it's going to be. And as you get higher up in the sky, the more light it's going to be. And in the west itself, it remains light for a long time after the sun sets. So the question, when the Gemara said, this is a very basic question, which the Gemara doesn't explain to us, which is what's Elyon and what's Tachton. So that's something again which we have to come back to. But basically, that also is part of the machlokas of the when is considered to be nightfall. Is it when in the east it's dark and you can see stars in the east, or is it when in the west it's dark and you see stars in the west? Or is it overhead? And that's a big question which we're going to have to deal with. So now Gemara starts dealing with it and says, that's Rabbi Yehuda. It's the amount of time it takes to walk a half a meal after sunset. The amount of time it takes to walk a half a meal, 1,000 amos, is itself a question in halacha, which depends on the sugya, which we're going to see in a few minutes. Whatever amount that time it is that's the amount of time Ben Hashmoshos. So it's anywhere from, depending on the Shita, 9 minutes, because the meal is either 18 minutes or 22.5 minutes or 24 minutes, 9 minutes to 12 minutes after Sheki'ah. That's the total time Ben Hashmoshos.
Is it based on Eretz Yisrael?
Based on Eretz, yes, and that's important because yes, everything else has to be adjusted based on Eretz Yisrael. Yes, it's based on Eretz Yisrael, and also presumably on an equinox day, because the time it takes for the sun to set can vary at various different times a day. We have to figure different times a year. We have to figure out, extrapolate from an equinox day to other days of the year.
What's equinox day?
Equinox,
12 hours a night.
12 hours? Equal,
yes.
Yeah, so it's
2 days.
June 20th is the solstice.
April and September.
Yes. June 20th is March. June 22nd is coming up, solstice, the longest day of the year. Right? December 22nd is the shortest days of the year. That's called the solstice, with summer and fall and winter. In between those, on March 22nd and September 22nd are the equinox, when the night and day are equal.
Which is when spring starts and when fall starts.
Right.
Specifically.
And the other ones are winter. The winter and summer start on solstice days, and spring and fall start on equinox days. I probably just confused them more than you were confused before.
What was the solstice meaning again?
Either the longest or shortest day.
It could be either or.
Yeah. Equinox is equal. Gemara Avodah Zarah says that Adam Rishon made the holiday of December 25th. The Gemara says that until the Adam Rishon, this is going to according to the assumption that B'Tishrei Nivra Olam. So as the days got shorter and shorter, Adam got afraid that the world was going to end because of him, and that gradually the days were going to disappear, and there's not going to be any more daytime anymore. So on December 22nd, it was the shortest day of the year. It took him a few days to realize that the days are getting longer. On December 25th, he realized, the days are getting longer, so this must be Olam Kamin Hago Noheg, right? And therefore, he made a simcha, and that simcha comes down today as a Goyish holiday. So that was the origin of the holiday. I want to say something controversial right now, which is
You didn't just say something controversial?
which is that my perspective on Chazal and science is based on this Gemara. Because if Adam Rishon was not told science, Adam Rishon, Yitzir Kapav Shal Kodesh Baruch Hu, right? The first creation, the holiest person ever lived, was not taught science when he was created. It means that Hashem didn't necessarily reveal science to the greatest people on earth. It means Chazal's knowledge of science was not necessarily any different than the people of the time. Just like Adam Rishon had no idea that days get shorter, which is basic, astronomy 101, right? He thought it was a punishment. So too, we don't have to ascribe to Chazal knowledge of science.
This is a medrash that said he...
It's a Gemara.
Oh, it's a Gemara.
It's a Gemara. Okay? So, okay, that was off on a tangent, but an important one. So, right, so, Rabbi says, Rabbi Yossi Ben Hashmashos is terrifying. Ben Hashmashos is like the blink of an eye. Ze nichras v'ze yotze. One day ends and the next day begins. So, Herifying in Chazal also has a shear. The time of Herifying is amount time takes to walk 50 amos. That's a blink of an eye. It's a long blink of an eye. But the amount time takes to walk 50 amos, which is, I don't know, a minute or so. That is so. That's the length of Bein Hashmashos.
So they walk faster in those days? Is that it?
What? They walk as fast as they blink slower. V'yam shalamodov. You can't determine it precisely when it happens. Okay, so then the Gemara goes into what it means that you make it you give it the stringency of both days. We're going to skip that part. Let's go to Beis. And also I'm down on Beis here. Hakufa kasha. So this is difficult. Amarta ezu pnei bein hashmoshos. We say what's it? When the sun sets, calls mashmnei mizrach madimim. As long as the eastern sky is red. Hayichsiv atachton v'lo yichsiv elyon. So, but if it's black on the bottom and not black on the top, Lailu, it's considered to be already night. Because it's not red completely, it's partially black. But then you say, and it says, then you're going to say, no, even if the bottom part of the sky is dark, as long as the upper part of the sky is still not dark, it's Bein Hashmashos, right? So which one is it? What determines the Bein Hashmashos? What determines the Aaron of Bein Hashmashos? When the eastern sky is dark on the bottom, right? When it's no longer red, or when the entire sky is dark. So Amarabba Marviuda Marashmuel Kroch Vitani. You put these two parameters together. Eza Bein Hashmashos. What's it to be Bein Hashmashos? Mishatishka Chama calls Machapnei Mizrach Madimim. Once the sun sets, as long as the entire eastern sky is red. But also, if the bottom part of the sky is dark and not the top part of the sky, it's also Bein Hashmashos. Hishva Elyon. If the top part of the sky is already dark and it's like the bottom part, that's Laila. Then Rabbi Yosef gives the Amashul a different resolution. This means to say, Mishatishka Chama is once the sun sets, calls Mashrei Mizrach Madimim, as long as there's red in the eastern sky, it's not Bein Hashmashos. It's Yom, still daytime. Once the bottom part of the sky goes dark, but not the upper part of the sky, then Ben Hashmashos begins. Laila. Then it's once it comes dark in the upper sky and it's equivalent to the lower sky, that's night. So here you see a fascinating thing, according to Shmuel. You see the sun could set and it could still be considered to be daytime, according to Shmuel, because he says already the eastern sky is dark. The eastern sky is dark, it means the sun is set. It's reddish, but the sun is set. So it means that it must be sunset, and at a certain amount of time after the sun is set, as long as there's a red glow, it's still going to be daytime. Now, according to Rav, the moment the sun sets, it seems to be Bein Hashmashos. According to Shmuel, it seems Bein Hashmashos starts later than that. That's going to be important to understand Rabbeinu Tam later on. Okay, the Gemara says, what's the difference in time between these two parameters? They follow their reasoning elsewhere. How long does Bein Hashmashos last? Amrab, Amrab Yudah, Amar Shmuel, Shlosha Chelkei Mil. 3/4 of a meal. Well, actually, more asks. What 3 parts of a meal? And more asks, my Shlosha Chelkei Mil. What are 3 parts of a meal? Ilay Matlasa, Palge Mila. If you're going to say it's 3 halves of a meal, name a meal mechza. Should say it's a meal and a half. El Tlasa Tilse Mila. Maybe you'll say it's 3/3 of a meal. Name a meal. Let's say a meal. El Tlasa Rive Mila. 3/4 of a meal. Shmuel says 2 parts of a meal. What's 2 parts of a meal? If it's 2 parts of a meal, so 2 halves of a meal, say a meal. the trey ribei meal is 2/4 a meal. Lema chatzi meal, say half a meal. Ella, trey tasei meal, right? There's 2/3 of a meal. So Shmuel either it's 2/3 of a meal and 3/4 a meal, as opposed to what we saw earlier, half a meal, right? So Shmuel pushes made as much as later, but not by much, right? Before he said half a meal, which is 9 minutes, he adds a few minutes, right? And the Gemara says, what's the difference between 2/3 and 3/4? Ika beinayu. Oops. We have so the Ika beinayu. The difference is palga de danka, half of a sixth. You figure out the math. I'm not good at math. Okay. And then the Gemara goes off on a tangent here, and then the Gemara comes back to this issue here. Abai and Beis. Abai chazi Rava, they call David the Mizrach. Abai saw Rava looking at the east. Amalei vatani kol zman shebnei Mizrach ma'adimim. It says all the time that it's red. So west. Sorry. Amalei said, "Wait a minute. Why look at the west? But I didn't say kol zman shebnei Mizrach ma'adimim. So as long as the east is red, why are you looking at the west? Wrong direction. Look at the east. See if it's red over there. Not if it's red over there." So he throws a monkey wrench in the whole thing. He says, "I'm going to miss about the bnei Mizrach mamash. You think the whole previous Gemara was about actually the east? No. Even if it's dark in the east, it's still not nightfall. Rather, it's panim hamadimim es hamizrach. It's the face which illuminates the east. It's the face illuminates, right? They're like the panim meiros. So the face illuminates from the west, the east, and we're looking at not the east itself, but the face which illuminates the east, which is at the west. So he turns the whole previous Gemara upside down, right? He says we're now looking to see darkness in the eastern sky, which we assume till now, we look at the western sky. And that's where we determine when it's dark. Okay? So, some say Rava Chazia Bayit Kodavi the Mizrach. They saw that Rava saw Abaye looking at the east, and he said to him, "You think it's the east? No, panim hamadimim es hamizrach. This is panim hamadim, the face which illuminates the east. V'simonech chavsa, and the simon for this is a window, and we'll come to understand the window idea later on. Window. Okay, we'll come back to that." Okay, so the Gemara then next gives the shiur, how we would determine how much time is lapsed in order to give or be half a meal. We're going to skip that. We're going to skip Dalet also, which talks about what you would be tefillah of Kohanim. We're going to go to the next page, and the next famous Gemara, which is from Lamed Hey Beis Aleph. Amar Rabbi Amar Shmuel Kochav Echad Yom. One day, one star, it's the day. Shnayim, 2 stars, Bein Hashmoshos. It's twilight. Shlosh of the 3 stars, it's Laila. Also in the Brisa, Tainam Yochid, Kochav Echad Yom, Shnayim Bein Hashmoshos, Shlosha Laila. Okay, that seems simple enough, but then we have a monkey wrench. Rabbi Yossi, Lo Kochavim Gdolim, Hanirim Bayom. Not big stars, which you can see by day. Lo Kochavim Ktanim Sheinirim El Balayla. Nor small stars, which you can only see at night. El Beinonim, but medium stars. So that seems very strange, right? You said Lila is only small stars. So you're saying actually before Lila, it's already considered to be halachic Tzeis Kochavim. Now, first, there's an important point to make here, which is that you can see stars is not what defines nightfall. That it's nightfall has a sign. It's manifest in the fact that you can see stars. Nightfall is a certain degree of darkness. And the Gemara is saying if you want to know how to measure that degree of darkness, it's when you can see stars. Now, there's a lot of problems with this Gemara. It's very complicated. First of all, there are evidently, if I recall correctly, 7 gradations of stars. From the brightest, 7 gradations.
What's that word?
Gradations.
Gradients.
Gradients. Okay, it's gradients of stars. So in other words, from the most bright to the most dim.
This includes the sun or not?
Not includes the sun. And the most dim, you only see very, very late at night. You don't see them until long after Sheki'ah Sachama. As a matter of fact, Rabbeinu Tam's Zman is the time, if you go, my question where his Zman is, but it's approximately the time when you can see the most dim stars. Mm-hmm. Way before that, you can see the normal stars. The most dim stars only appear at that much later time. So the So, but on the other hand, there's no stars that you can see during the day. So as you start seeing during the day, the only stars you see during the day are actually planets. Okay, but obviously they understood that planets are also stars. So they're saying not stars, in other words, planets you can see during the day, nor stars which only become visible deep into the night. But medium stars which appear sometime in the middle. There's another problem here, which is we, in our modern days, we never look at the sky. And if we do look at the sky, we don't see many stars because we have ambient lighting, light pollution, which causes us not to be able to see as many stars. You can see more stars in South Bend than you can see in Chicago, but you still can't see all the stars because the light interferes with it. You have to go way out in the middle of nowhere in order to see stars.
What light interferes with that?
Street lighting, house lighting, everything, yes. So the sky has many more stars than you see when you live in a city. If you go out to the country, it's mind-boggling how many more stars you see. It's stunning. So the stars we see are just a very poor selection of what stars there are. Also, since we don't look up, we don't know where the bright stars are or where the dim stars are. If you're an expert, you can find stars much more quickly than one of us, because you know exactly where to look in the sky to find the right stars, right? So an astronomer or any normal person back in the old days when people actually looked up and not their phones, right? Or a country kid will be able to see stars much more quickly than any of us can see stars. Okay, we have to carefully look around and see where they are, what possibly they are. So this 3 stars in and of itself requires understanding, and we'll come back to that later on. Okay, this is all one Gemara, which is relevant to our conversation. The next Gemara is in Pesachim Daf Tzadik Daled, and that's the next page. And the Gemara says there, Amar Rava, Aleph, Shita Alfe Parse Have Alma. Whatever that means in geographic terms, the world is 6,000 parsos in its diameter. The Sumcha de Rakia Alfe Parsa, and the thickness of the Rakia is 1,000 parsos. Now, in order to understand this, we have to understand. The Gemara is going to later talk about this, but the Gemara is going to have to understand right now already. Chazal subscribe to the view that the world is a sphere underneath a dome, and that the sun at night goes behind the dome, and it comes back to the other side. In other words, what hides the sun what hides the sun at night is not the fact that it's beneath the earth on the other side of the earth, but it's behind the dome. They were not aware of where the world was round, but they didn't think that the sun went down to the southern hemisphere. I mean, the other hemisphere, not southern. In our case, the western hemisphere, the eastern hemisphere. Which one? We're in the western hemisphere, right? So western. So they were the east. They're what we call the eastern hemisphere, but not the western hemisphere. So they thought that the sun doesn't go there. The sun goes around the dome, and the dome itself has a thickness. So the sun, according to this, if you take a look at the next page, you'll see a diagram of it. You'll see in the margin, you see the sun. It says there ha'olam. So it says the sun. See that next page? The last page.
Last page?
Yeah. You see in the margin there? So the sun.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. The sun, it's a hemisphere, not a full sphere. The sun goes straight into that dome, and it comes through a window. There are 365 windows. A window for each day of the year, because the sun, again, is something which we don't usually notice because we're not aware of.
Which picture is this?
No, it looks like a semicircle.
The semicircle.
Okay, so we don't look at this. We don't realize this, but the sun comes out and sets in a different place every day of the year. Okay, it's slightly different. So because that's what has to do with the seasons and where the sun is in relation to the earth. So so it goes out, comes in, goes through the thickness of this dome, goes inside the sphere, then comes the thickness of the dome on the other side, and comes up around again for the next day. Now, this is actually a topic of a machlokas between the Chachmei Yisrael and Chachmei Umos. And if you take a look in Aleph on that page where the diagram is, from the Gemara later in Pesachim, it says in the, not right at the beginning, but 6 lines down. In the day, the sun goes underneath the dome. And a night above the dome. The Chachamim of the nations of the world say, and night, during the day, the sun goes beneath the sky, the dome, and at night it goes beneath the earth. And that's the diagram which you see right next to that, where the sun is going around, right? Like we understand the sun to go today. So the Omar Rebbe says, interesting proof. He says, "V'nirin divrei midavarenu." I think that the Chachmei Umos are right, not the Chachmei Yisrael. Why? Shebayom ma'yonos sonanim uvalayla roschim. Because during the day, springs are cold, and at night, springs are warm. Why are springs warm at night? It's actually it's more complicated than Rebbe points out here. But what he's trying to say is that it must be that the sun at night goes beneath the earth, and it warms up the springs. So that's why at night, springs are warmer than during the day, because the sun heats them from underneath.
So Rav is supported by modern science.
What?
Rav is supported by modern science.
Yeah, but not the springs thing is not the proof, because that's not on that account. Actually, evidently springs are the same temperature night and day. It's just the land around it becomes colder at night, and therefore the spring seems hotter. That seems to be the case. But in any event, be as it may, it's interesting because it doesn't use the term. It doesn't even say Rabbanan. It says Chachmei Yisrael and Chachmei Umos, right? So it's some people say it wasn't an argument between the Rabbanim and the non-Jews. There's an argument between the Jewish scientists and the non-Jewish scientists. The Chachmei Yisrael, the Jewish scientists held like this. The Chachmei Umos, the non-Jewish scientists held like that. Says Rabbi, I think the non-Jewish scientists are correct, which is again a fascinating thing in and of itself. So when the Gemara, which you saw the page before, when it talks about the diameter of the world, and it says, going back to that page, where it says on 406 here, Shita Alfei Parse Avi Alma, Vesumcha de Rekia Alfei Parse, it says the world is 6,000 parsos in diameter, of which the thickness of the dome is 1,000 parsa. And the Gemara goes on to say, one's a tradition and one's a logic. So he holds like Rabbi Bar Chana said to Rabbi Yochanan, how much a person walk during an average person walk during the daytime? Eser parsos, which is 40 mil. From dawn till sunrise, 5 mil. And from sunset until Tzeis Kochavim, 5 mil.
What does that mean, the meal, the Avanetz Chamisha meal?
2,000 amos times, the mount takes about, 2,000 amos times 5.
Say that again?
The mount takes 2,000 amos times 5, which is either 90 minutes if it's 5 times 18, or if it's 24, then 120 minutes, right?
Okay.
How many? No, what exactly? 5 times 24 is 120. Yes. Mm-hmm. So the thickness of the dome is 1/6 of the diameter of the thickness of the daytime itself. Then the Gemara gives another sheet afterwards, which is Rabbi Yehuda Omer Echad Me'asar Biyom. It's 1/10 of the day. Teida Kama Malechodam Be'nib Eser Biyom Eser Parsos. Same thing. But Me'alos Shachar and Eitzchama Arba Milin. From dawn until sunrise, 4 mil. She has come at say Arba Milin. And same on the other time. Nimsa Ovi Sheki'ah Echad Me'asar Miyom. Okay, then the Gemara goes through the discussion of this machlokas. Now, the problem is like this. There's a tremendous contradiction here. To the Gemara we learned in Shabbos, Gemara we learned in Pesachim. In Shabbos it said Bein Hashmashos, it's a half a meal, 3/4 of a meal, right? It's a karafine, which later on says is after either half or 3/4 or 2/3 of a meal. And here it says it's 4 or 5 meal. It's a major difference. Here it says me'alot from the is 4 or 5 meal. Many times it says in Shabbos. That's 2/3 to 3/4 a meal, or even half a meal. So how do you reconcile this contradiction? It's a very difficult contradiction to resolve. So the Gaonim, before Rabbeinu Tam, said there are 2 possibilities. One of them is the Gemaras arguing each other. It happens. The Rabbeinu Chanal says many times, evidently, that the Gemaras argue each other, and they're 2 different Batei Medrash, and they have 2 different understandings. The other understanding, which the Gaonim give, which is the mainstream opinion of the Gaonim, is that there are 2 types of Bein HaShmoshos. There's halachic Bein HaShmoshos and astronomical Bein HaShmoshos. Halachic Bein HaShmoshos is much shorter. Astronomical Bein HaShmoshos is much longer. In other words, until the last rays of light fade, it's well after halachic Bein HaShmoshos. Okay, so halachic Bein HaShmoshos ends much earlier than actual astronomical darkness. Halachic darkness is a lesser degree of darkness. That is how the Kohanim understood it. Along came Rabbeinu Tam and said, I have a different resolution. And my resolution is based on the fact that there are 2 Sheki'ahs. What are the 2 Sheki'ahs? He says the first Sheki'ah is when the sun starts going outwards and goes down the length of the dome. The second Sheki'ah is when the sun starts going up around the back of the dome. So the first sunset is, if you take a look back at the chart again, at the picture, the first sunset when the sun starts going out, and the second sunset is when the sun starts going up. Says Rabbeinu Tam, as long as the sun is going out, directly out, it's still daytime in halacha. It's only when the star starts going up behind the dome that Bein HaShmoshos starts. The second sunset is the real sunset, not the first one. And Bein HaShmoshos starts after that second sunset. Okay, and then you have the half meal, 2/3 of a meal, 3/4 of a meal, until nightfall occurs. Without getting into the math.
So how does he reconcile the 5 meal?
That's how it works.
It takes longer to go straight out?
Yeah.
And go over.
Right. So without getting into the precise math, if you're a Satmar Chassid, and you come from Hungary, originally, in Hungary, they didn't start Shabbos until the second Sheki'ah. So it means that the second Sheki'ah is approximately 58.5 minutes after our Sheki'ah. It depends how you define Rabbeinu Tam, but for our purposes, let's go with that.
Wow.
And that's why. So when they came to America, Moshe Feinstein spoke to Satmar and said, "Yes, you can't do that here anymore, right? Because Klal Yisrael is going to fall apart. We're going to keep Shabbos start Shabbos an hour earlier than you. So Klal Yisrael is going to have 2 Torahs. The whole Orthodox Judaism has become a joke." So Satmar Rebbe actually gave in, which is shocking in and of itself. He said that okay, we'll start keeping Shabbos earlier after the first Sheki'ah, even though that's not what they did in Hungary. They still retain that perspective of Rabbeinu Tam that there are 2 Sheki'ahs for Mincha. That's why they will daven Mincha up to an hour after Sheki'ah.
Wow.
Not because they hold it's still daytime. It's only once the second Sheki'ah starts, that's when it comes actual night. And yes, they do have a limit. They have a Zman Tefillah for Mincha, contrary to popular opinion. But it's 58.5 minutes after our Zman Tefillah. Okay, so that's why they'll daven Mincha until that time. Ad etzem hayom hazeh.
When you say ours, this is going back to the Indiana, New York question.
You're talking about New York. Yes, but
they also hold for the Gay Shabbos too after Shabbos, right? It's Ois Shabbos.
Right, so they're machmir on Ois Shabbos, right? But Kabbalah Shabbos they take the other chum, which is start Shabbos at the same time we do. Now, according to Rabbeinu, so the problem, of course, with the Rabbeinu Tam Shita, there's several problems. Again, first of all, the 3 stars doesn't really work according to him. The 3 stars, Professor Leo Levy, Yehuda Levy, Olav Shalom, who was a very well-known Talmud Chacham, who then was the head of Machon Leim in Yerushalayim, who wrote one of the early books on Jewish astronomy. It's called Jewish Chronometry. And he went to consulted experts about when you see three medium stars. And but usually in the horizon of Yerushalayim, 3 medium stars become visible if you're not an expert between 24 and 27 minutes. If you're an expert, between 18 minutes and 22 minutes. If you're somewhere in the middle, then between 22 and 24. So that's when stars become visible. In other words, basically, if you know how to look, where to look or don't know where to look, that's when stars become visible to you in the sky, which is a lot earlier than 72 minutes after Sheki'ah, right? So therefore, the Gaonim Shita, which is that Bein HaShmoshes starts at Sheki'ah, our sunset, which Rabbi Adam is called the first Sheki'ah, and then continues for a certain amount of minutes afterwards, seems borne out by the reality in Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, in Eretz Yisrael, where actually, since they're lower down, more closer to the equator, Bein HaShmoshes is shorter, and they see the sun, the darkness happens much quicker.
They see the part going over the dome much quicker? The Sheki'ahs that happen?
They see the stars much quicker.
Oh, see the stars quicker.
They see the stars much quicker.
So what do they do with the Rebbeinu Tam?
They don't keep it. So it's a famous story that there was a gadol who died in Yerushalayim, who came from Chutz La'aretz, and who even in Eretz Yisrael kept Rabbeinu Tam Zman. And main Yerushalayim is you bury as soon as possible. So his almana came to Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld and said, my husband always kept 72 minutes. So can we delay his burial until after 72 minutes? Because that was his minhag. Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld said, absolutely not. Minhag Yerushalayim is that starts about a half an hour after Sheki'ah, and we're going to bury him. We're going to start then with the preparations for the burial, even to be Michal Shabbos. So, and Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld was saying, we don't do Rabbeinu Tam here. That's not. So therefore, you can't. It's not appropriate for you to say, I want to be machmir like Rabbeinu Tam. That I'm sure it's not the same way nowadays, but that's the way it was back in the 1920s. So again, let's go through what's happening here. According to the Gaonim, how to resolve the contradiction between the two Gemaras? We say that, it doesn't get absolutely dark for a long time after halachic darkness. And that's considered to be the 4 or 5 mil. But real halachic darkness starts right at sunset, then Bein HaShmoshes begins, and when you can see 3 stars, which is about 24 minutes later, that's when nightfall happens for halachic purposes. According to Rabbeinu Tam, it's not night until the second Sheki'ah. The second Sheki'ah, when the sun sets beneath the horizon, which is our Sheki'ah, that's the first Sheki'ah, doesn't count. Only when the sun starts going up around the dome, which is the second Sheki'ah, about an hour later, that's when twilight starts, and then twilight goes on for as many minutes as we determine, half a meal, 2/3 a meal, 3/4 a meal, and so on and so forth. Okay, is that relatively clear? Relatively? What? Any questions so far?
I have no idea how the sun is actually light from the dome.
What?
The technicality of the sun being light from the dome, it doesn't work that way anyways, but I would think that the dome would be thick, right? It's
Yes.
Light, kind of like,
It has to be very thick, right? It has to be thick in order for light not to penetrate, yeah.
It's still penetrating through it, so it's very interesting.
As far as the numbers, I remember from Ramosha, he used the number in the 40s for Rebbeinu Tam, not 58. It's hungry to New York, or
That second Sheki'ah?
because when he describes how many minutes you have where everyone's holding it, and then I believe it's somewhere in the 40s, not 58.
I know, it could be, but I know that Moshe says that in his experience in America, Tzeis is never longer than 45 minutes, and it's after Sheki'ah, he says 50 minutes for sure, and but it's probably keep 72 because that's what people kept in the old country. I don't remember this thing.
Okay, as far as describing when you go from when it's
For the second Sheki'ah, between the thickness of the dome.
Okay, but
Yeah.
this is just a numeric thing.
Right. Now, since you have this Gemara here which says that according to one opinion, it's 5 mil, according to another opinion, it's 4 mil, and Rabbeinu Tam holds one of these opinions is correct. So 4 mil is at least 72 minutes, 4 times 18. 5 mil can be a maximum of 120 minutes, 5 times 24, depending on what you know the amount of time it takes to work a meal is. If you are a Soloveitchik, you keep Shabbos for 120 minutes after Sheki'ah. And now you keep 120 minutes after Sheki'ah, you base it on shows manios when it's more of a chumrah.
Wasn't according to Rabbeinu Tam was the second Sheki'ah, so shouldn't it be even longer than 72 minutes?
No, that's the second Sheki'ah starts at, it depends if you adjust it for time of year or not. Well, the way we keep Rabbeinu Tam, meaning people keep Rabbeinu Tam today, makes no sense. Because those of us keep Rabbeinu Tam, keep 72 minutes around the year. That doesn't make any sense. Because it should fluctuate depending.
It should be from the first Sheki'ah, according to Rabbeinu Tam. He has a different Sheki'ah.
Right.
So it should be, I don't know how much time it is.
No, so I'm telling you, the first Sheki'ah, the second Sheki'ah is 58.5 minutes.
It's 58.
And then there's 72, it's 22. What's 58, 72 minus 58.5?
That's a bit long.
It's what? What?
It's 72 minus 58 and a half?
Yeah.
It's 14 and a half.
4 and a half. So that's what he owes is 14 and a half is two-thirds of a meal. Okay, so that, in other words, he's saying the three and a third meal until it's the second Sheki'ah. And then 2/3 of a meal when it goes up around the dome.
Say it again, how many meal from the
3 and a
first
third.
Sheki'ah to the second Sheki'ah?
3 and a third. 3 and a third.
3 and a third meal,
Yeah.
which is 58 point something.
58.5, yeah.
Right, and then you have another
Two-thirds of a meal
2/3 of a meal,
till absolute darkness.
which is 14 minutes, you say?
Yeah. Okay. So but again, this will fluctuate based on time of year because, as we said, the twilight lasts different amounts of time, different times of year. It shouldn't be a specific time all the time.
What is twilight? Is that Banish Moses?
Yeah. Yeah. So it shouldn't be a specific static the entire year. So that's where Moshe comes along and says, you know what, 72 minutes is certainly just the chumrah, and it's an arbitrary number because by 72, even in Europe, it was really dark. In America, it's dark much earlier, but in Europe, it was dark for sure by 72.
In America, it's dark early.
It was dark earlier in America. Sorry,
By 7 New York.
I mean all of America.
So where's the Rabbeinu?
Well, what is it? Yeah, New York out of America. Chicago's the second city. You know, it's not. Yeah.
It's only going to be less as you go further south.
Yeah.
It would only be in Minneapolis or Maine that it could theoretically
Be longer.
a little longer.
Where did the Rabbeinu Tam live that he was?
Paris, France.
France. So
Oh, so that brings us back to the first page. In other words, here you are in Gateshead, and it doesn't get completely dark in the summer. So you can't you can't say, oh, just adjust it. Adjusting doesn't do any good, right? Because as much as you adjust it, you're never going to get to that absolute darkness. So therefore, it has to be an arbitrary time. You have to say 72 minutes on the clock, because there's no way to adjust it in the summer. Again, in the winter,
He said farther north it never gets dark at all.
yes, but even in Vilna, it doesn't get fully dark in the summer.
No, but I mean, farther north is
Trondheim.
And where?
Trondheim.
Yeah.
Trondheim.
So there you have to do something.
Right. So the Tiferet Yisrael speaks about that. Tiferet Yisrael, he lived in Danzig. Danzig is very far north, but it still gets dark some point. But instead, what about further north than me? What do you do? So he said his shita, which is at this point you have to make it up because we have no precedent in halacha.
I'm just saying that maybe you're in a town, if you're farther north than adjustable, then maybe you're in that zone for Rabbeinu Tam's purposes.
Yeah, but what if the sun never sets? Then you still can't. There's never dark, right?
Bring a proof from that if you're too far north to adjust Rabbeinu Tam 72, then maybe you have to make an extra for those elevations, even though they're lower.
What age do you want to give?
What?
What age do you want to give?
Whatever age he gives for farther north. That's what I'm trying to say.
So in far north, he says go by the nearest community.
What?
The nearest community. The nearest community which actually has a sunset and
Not
darkness.
feasible to give such names for a place with a large Jewish community.
Right. So Jews are not meant to live in certain areas, including South Bend, because Tisha B'Av ends so late. Don't get me wrong, but no, it's worse in other places further north, which is a big problem. It's basically saying Jews are supposed to live in temperate areas, not in places where it's wacky. Yes. Yeah. It's like the Rambam's golden mean. They have to go by the average. Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with South, it's just the wrong time zone.
Right, exactly. You gentlemen, do you know who created time zones?
Yeah,
What? No, Benjamin Franklin did not create time zones. Train companies.
Yeah, they needed to standardize how things were being delivered and what time.
Yes, you can't have a train. Before trains, every place set its own clock. based on when the sun was overhead being noon. And you can't have a train schedule on that basis because everybody's clock is different. So therefore, they came along and said we have to standardize time zones. And that's why in a place like South Bend, noon and the sun being directly overhead have no bearing on each other. Right?
2 hours off in the summer.
2 hours off?
You get it, the 6 to 6 day in April, it's 8 to 8.
8 to 8. Okay, great. So that time the anti-Semitic train lines, obviously, they those robber barons. One of the things that they did was they imposed all this halachic difficulty on us. Okay, but so the idea is that once upon a time, each place had its own time, and then wouldn't have a problem like we have here. But nowadays, time zones have created all these difficulties, but you can function without them. So so getting back to our discussion here, which is that if to say Rabbeinu Tam is a fixed amount of time doesn't make sense astronomically, but it does make sense geographically. Because if you look at where people lived, they had no choice but to say 72 minutes on the clock is the time because it doesn't get fully dark in the summer. So we have to call an arbitrary time and say, okay, this is dark enough. Okay, and that's 72 minutes. Even in the winter, when perhaps it was earlier, they kept that time. And Ramesh's Chiddush, which is, he says, even though in America it's not relevant, 50 minutes for sure, then still we should keep 72 as a chumrah.
But Moshe holds 72, or he holds that you could be kind Shitas Rabbeinu Tam with, let's say, 50.
No, he holds it should be machmer 72.
So,
He holds a chumrah, but he says a ben Torah should be machmer.
Again, 50 is the 24 of Israel.
Yeah, so the 24 of Israel is actually about 36 here in America. It's about the twilight is here about a third longer than it is in Israel. But at Motzei Shabbos we're machmir. First because of the Chumrah of Shabbos. Secondly because of Tosefah Shabbos. Okay, so therefore we've come to various different shitas. 42 minutes, 45 minutes, 50 minutes. There's some people for some reason do 60 minutes, even though there's no precedent for that. So it's interesting that in Rabbi Elie Levy's first book, he put in a gummed stock. It's like this is supposed to a sticker. He's supposed to put in the book which says the rabbinate of Kahal Adas Yishurim, the Breuers, has determined that the minhag in New York is 50 minutes after Sheki'ah, and outside New York it's 45 minutes after Sheki'ah. Now, I don't know how the rabbinate of Kahal Adas Yishurim can determine what the minhag is in South Bend, Indiana, but that's what they said, right?
What is even the svara for such a thing?
I really don't know. I guess they hold that whoever came to New York first somehow established 50 minutes. Of course, in New York City it gets dark. It's hard to tell also when it gets dark because of all the ambient lighting. There are barely any stars, so maybe that's part of it. So, but that's that he says is the minhag established by the Ekes for all of America. So this is what underlies the additional amount of Motzei Shabbos is Tosefah Shabbos and the Chumrah of Shabbos. Now comes a very interesting ramification. This is of course the end of a tinus. So the end of a tinus, the end of a fast day. So the end of a fast day, Rabbi Moshe holds, and this is a super chumrah, that you go 50 minutes after Sheki'ah, just like Motzei Shabbos.
On all Tanesim?
On all Tanesim.
I thought some Tanesim have different...
Not quite Rabbi Moshe. Rabbi Moshe holds all fast 50 minutes after Sheki'ah. I don't pass like Rabbi Moshe because it's 50. Okay, for Tosefah Shabbos I understand that, but it's a very big chumrah for after Tainus to Rabbanan. Okay, for Yom Kippur I understand it's the Doraisa and Tosefas, but a lot of poskim are Vani B'Socham are makel on a fast to go after the earlier Tzeis, which is again the three stars based on a rise of Eretz Yisrael, extrapolated outwards to wherever you are, latitude, which makes the difference, and that's going to be the end of a tinus. I don't know what your Rav Paskins. I don't ask you.
It's tricky for Tinus Esther because you have the end of the fast, but then you have a Megillah, which needs to be by Tzeis. So, although it's also Durban, Megillah has, so if you call the end of the fast earlier than the time you have Megillah, you have an interesting thing in
Right. So I usually sneak a cup of coffee in between that time between the two. Yes.
Those Midwest Torah books, it's everything 72 in there.
Not a fast. Not a, I don't think they give a time for a fast.
How much does a Rav hold, how many minutes after a Rabbanan take a?
What?
How many minutes do you hold after a Rabbanan?
I look at the chart. So in this chart, if you hear, actually, if you go to myzmanim.com, which is one of the great benefits of the internet.
That's cheating though.
Yeah. So what? Was something more cheating? I use Google too. You know what they call Google today? They call the Google Hador. So when it says a Gadol Hador, now you have the Google Hador. So my Zmanim, they actually have this man of Rabbi Elie Ginsparg. He went in the way he determined Zmanim, he went up to the highest building in Yerushalayim. It's still there today. It's the base Knesset Zoharei Chama in Machane Yehuda. It's the building which has a sundial on the side. I don't know if you ever noticed it, but in Machane Yehuda, on Rehov Yafo, there's a shul which has a sundial on the side of the building. And that was the tallest building in Yerushalayim. It was 3 stories high. So he went to the top of that building every day to see when the sun rose, and when the sun set, and when it became dark. And his shiur is about 27 minutes after Sheki'ah, and that is the minute Yerushalayim. Again, adjusted for the time of years, because sometimes slightly longer, slightly shorter, but in Yerushalayim the difference is very different. Since it's much further south, it's very little difference. It doesn't fluctuate as much as the Chutz
Are we talking about for Shabbos or for?
No, for a past.
For a fast.
Okay, in America, it generally comes out to be about 33 to 36 minutes after Sheki'ah. It's more or less, if you take a look at the chart here, you see those numbers, 19.8, 16.1, 4.81, 5.95. Those are degrees beneath the horizon. When the sun's coming up, so 90.8 degrees beneath the horizon, that's one opinion is when dawn occurs, which means the first light in the sky can be perceived. Another opinion is it's 16.1 degrees beneath the horizon. And then Tzeis Chavim is, according to the Gra, or Baal Tanya, is either 4.81, it's 5.95. According to Rabbeinu Tam, which is 72 minutes, but adjusted for time of year, it's 16.1. According to the more Machmir Shita of Rabbeinu Tam, which would be reflexive with dawn, it's 19.8. So the
Numbers mean again?
degrees beneath the horizon. How many degrees the sun is beneath the horizon? Because that's what determines how dark it is. Right? A certain amount of degrees beneath the horizon. So the question is when it reaches that number of degrees beneath the horizon. Or when it comes up, how many degrees it is beneath the horizon. So the basic premise here is that the Rashaz, which is 16.1, which is 5.95, is more or less the actual time. That's Baal Tanya, the actual time when you can see 3 medium stars, and with Tukachinsky is like 6.0 instead of 5.95. So they're very similar. One could so that would be the baseline halacha would be 5.95 or 6 if you round it off. Everything else would be either chumrah or kula. Okay? Yes.
So I'm a little confused on where the solid matrix fall in there, like you were mentioning.
Oh yeah. So they take the opinion of Gemara, which the Gemara seems to reject, is that there are 5 meal between sunset and absolute darkness. It seems Gemara accepts 4 meal, but there's a Rambam which seems to say 5 meal. So already that's adding on 18 to 24 minutes, right? And and they take the most machmir shita in a meal, which is 24 minutes, as opposed to 18, which is the most lenient shita in how long it takes to walk a meal, right? So therefore, there's 5 meal between sunset and absolute darkness times 24 minutes per meal equals 120 minutes.
Now, according to what you're
So
saying,
they don't hold 7.
72 is nothing for them. 72 is for kids. Yeah.
but according
Now,
to
how does that impact the times that fast ends by their shita?
So that's a good question. I don't think they wait 120 minutes after fast, which are the Rabbanon, but I don't know how long they wait. I don't think I ever clarified that.
based on your chart, though, these charts are brisk. It probably did not get even after 120 minutes.
Oh, for sure, it wasn't
Still
dark.
wasn't dark.
No, it was not dark. Yeah, never got dark. Yeah,
In the south.
right. And that's why it's divorced from our reality because they had a different reality over there. And if Rabbeinu Tam was looking up the sky in the summer, he never saw it got dark, get it full dark. So it makes sense to take his position.
Only if you lived in risk.
In Paris, the same thing.
Even in Paris?
Yeah. All the cities in which Jews lived in Northern Europe were all way north, and they have all the same situation.
So what's Paris compared to, it's in Canada, latitude in Canada?
I don't know. So I'm not even sure that. I don't think Jews live in Canada that far north. All Jews live in Canada.
Paris is not so fancy.
Paris is pretty far south, compared to England, that's not right.
Yeah. I mean,
It's still much further north than we are. It's not much further south. Paris and London are more or less same latitude, right?
Well,
Paris is London has to be north.
What?
Look at the maps, it's south. You're a little bit north of us, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Is
Anyway, I just took New to the gates, but if you look at the tables for most of the cities where Jews lived in beforehand, they have the same phenomenon.
Isn't Winnipeg the furthest in Canada?
What?
Isn't that the furthest north Winnipeg?
No.
I know, but those are all not so far north. Relatively speaking, they're not so far north.
Right.
Yeah, so I don't know. I think it actually does get dark there, fully dark. Might be mistaken. One has to look at the charts. Nowadays, it's easy. Look on my Zmanim to see all these things.
It would seem to me that Montreal might be on line with Paris.
Okay, could be.
But you're right, in the United States, everything's gonna be south of Paris.
Yeah.
What about Anchorage?
It's hard to imagine. We think
It's
we think of Madrid as like a Mediterranean climate, and it is. But we're on the same latitude as Madrid. So
I think Atlanta, it lines up with Eretz Yisrael.
so okay.
Dallas, Atlanta line up.
Yeah. Okay, makes sense. So I, on the other hand, I know it's late, but I wanted to go look at the other side, which is for the beginning of a fast. Now, for the fast which begin in the morning, right? That also is a big subject of controversy. When it begins. There are a lot of people, and again, so many poskim who paskin, and I don't agree with them, that it's that alos hashachar, dawn, when a fast starts, it's not symmetrical. A fast start, we're machmir to start a fast much earlier than we're machmir to end the fast, because that's what seems to the Gemara, that we go, at the beginning of the day begins at dawn, even though the end of the day goes by Tzeis Kochavim, which is earlier than absolute darkness. The beginning of a fast is when dawn occurs, when the first light comes over the horizon. So if you see here, there are two opinions about dawn. 9.8 degrees beneath the horizon, 60.1 degrees beneath the horizon, which is much, much earlier, symmetrically speaking, than when we call Tzeis Kochavim, 5.95 degrees after Sheki'ah. But that is, it seems to be the halacha. That's the way the Tzeis Rabbanan works. And therefore, some people say, okay, it's only 72 minutes. But that doesn't really work, or 90 minutes according to other shita. But it doesn't really work, again, because it should fluctuate. So when people ask me, people don't necessarily ask me, but people ask me, I tell them, you can't go by 72 minutes on the clock, you have to go by 72 minutes adjusted by time of year. Now, why 72? Because there's this Rambam who actually says 72 minutes. So we rely on that Rambam, that's why it's this Rambam there.
So if
Right.
somebody lived in Australia, everything would be exactly Upacare, everything would be the opposite?
Yes, exact opposite, yeah. And they have the problem in our winter, yes. So again, the beginning of the fast, according to some poskim, which I don't pass that way, is precisely 72 minutes before. According to other poskim, it's 72 minutes adjusted for time of years, whenever it's 16.1 degrees beneath the horizon.
So that just means the servant Teves in the northern hemisphere is going to be less than 72 minutes before.
It could be, yeah. But it's usually 72 adjustable is more of like a few minutes longer. It isn't a few minutes longer. That's the way it works in reality.
Well, so what's it for Shiur of times?
What?
It's
It's much earlier. Yeah. Like, yeah. Again, if you look at my Zmanim, say Alos HaShachar yesterday, according to the adjustable 72 minutes, was actually before 4 a.m. So, what price is nafkamina? If you get up in the middle of the night, you want to eat, right? After Alos HaShachar, you can't eat anymore, right? So if you get up in the middle of the night, you always have to check if you want that midnight snack.
New York.
What?
You live in New York time, I think. South Bend be 5 o'clock.
Yeah, right. Yes, no, I think here it was also much earlier. I'm not sure what time it was. But you're right, it's going to be different depending on where you are.
So we can start davening on Shavuos, we just can't get to, we could have to take Pesukah Zimmer for 2 hours.
Yeah.
Oh, sounds good.
Now, I want to end with this, which is nobody knows what time Zman Hanochas Zman Talis is. Nobody knows how to determine that. But when it's light enough to put on your talis. Yes, but nobody knows when that is. Impossible to say. It's impossible, almost impossible to check nowadays because first we don't know what color Tchelis was precisely. Secondly, we have too much light, so we can't so we can check much earlier. We can figure out much earlier than they could back then.
Put it on whenever you want.
So there are many different shitas, right? Exactly. That's what happens. There are many different shitas. Some say it's 60 minutes before sunrise. Some people say it's 25 minutes before sunrise. And for some reason, since it's up for grabs, this halacha, so generally speaking, people say 10.2 to 11 degrees beneath the horizon. It's kind of arbitrary, but that's usually the way they determine it. So if you really want to be sure of yourself, you won't say a bracha on talis until 25 minutes before sunrise. But again, in the winter in a place like South Bend, that's very, very difficult to do. So sometimes we'll either b'diavad, which is from Alos HaShachar, you can make a bracha. Ask your local Orthodox rabbi what you should do. It's not. It's really a question which has never been fully resolved. Isn't that amazing? We're in the 21st century, and there are certain things which halacha means up in the air.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.